joining us today for a webinar Streamlining Physical Inventory Journals in Dynamics 365 Business Central. My name is Katie and I'll be the facilitator today. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question area in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen and we'll answer questions at the end. The session will be recorded and posted on our blog as well as shared with you early next week. Now I would like to introduce our presenter today, Jesse Gerke, D365 Business Central Solution Specialist here at Encore. Jesse, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you for the introductions, Katie. Yes, today I'm going to be covering the processing the physical inventory journal within Business Central 365. All right, so for our agenda today, we're going to be talking about the methods that you can use for processing the physical inventory journal. From a high-level perspective, that is, there's two primary options, which is calculate by counting period and doing the calculate, doing a general calculate inventory. Calculating by the accounting period, a great utility for that is if you want to schedule recurring counts by item, by location. So this is whenever you kind of have a recurring schedule that you'd like to maintain. The calculate counting period option is a great option for maintaining and providing maintenance for any sort of recurring counts that you'd like to be occurring. And that's really going to flag it for the user to, it's going to prompt them to perform a count. So that's one of the intentionalities there. The calculate inventory action, that is more of a straight line calculation. So the first option, that calculate by counting period, that does require some setup and configuration to be performed in order to move forward with that calculation option. However, the calculate inventory action, there's no setup that's required there. As long as you have functioning items and inventory, you can run the calculate inventory action from the physical inventory journal. So that calculate inventory, it's essentially always available whenever you need to run that and just perform your physical inventory count. Without setup, that calculate inventory will be available for you. In addition, performing the calculate inventory action is also great if you have a defined focus that you are intentionally going into the physical inventory journal to hit. Maybe that's you want to run it by a location, you want to run it by a bin, or you could also run it by an item. But that calculate inventory, you're specifying this filters. You're specifying filters that you'd like to utilize for performing your physical inventory count. So it is a little more user dependent in order for you to be inputting that data and how you would like to run your physical inventory calculation. So again, just to cover that, two methods. One, what requires more of setup and is meant to kind of prompt the user to be performing a count, and the other doesn't require setup, but empowers the user to essentially make the decision for themselves. So the second one, the user kind of needs to be making an adjustment call on what is being counted as opposed to being prompted to count specific inventory. All right, so then also be touching on the physical inventory counting period. So as I was just stating that first option does require some setup. So we will be touching on the physical inventory counting periods, what it means, how we set that up, and what all of that information means as we are processing. All right, so for the physical inventory counting period, so this is a quick overview of what the physical inventory counting periods look like. So this is captured from the Business Central table page view that is presented to users. And you can see here that we've set up some default code selections. We have annual, biweekly, monthly, quarterly, and then of course, weekly is an option too. You can name these, however, that code, you can name that code however you like. What really matters is the count frequency per year. So it's that count frequency per year that will be driving the calculation, that's going to be driving the recommendation to the user on how frequently a count may be required. So if it's once, if it's annually, as soon as you perform your physical inventory count, it's going to roll over and it's not going to prompt the user to be performing a physical inventory count for that item again until literally a year later. So it's once a year. Once you do it within that period of time, then it's going to roll over and you won't get that recommendations to perform the count there. And then on the flip side, weekly, if you want to count an item weekly, maybe it's a high priority item, you do that frequency count of 52, which means that every week it's going to provide a prompt for the user to process that. Now, we'll cover what that looks like once we navigate to the physical inventory journal itself. So quickly here's the physical inventory journal. Here are our two calculation options. Before I jump into this calculations, I'm going to first slip to our item card. So when we are setting up the physical inventory counting periods, we will be there's two locations that we can set that up. One is at the item card level, here, and the other is at the stock keeping unit card level. Now, the primary difference between these two options and which path you're going to pursue is dependent on how you've set up locations in your environment. So if you are not utilizing or leveraging locations, then you're going to want to use the item card. So this is for, if you have a very basic warehousing setup in your environment and you're not location dependent, so you don't need to track if an item is at different locations. If you do have multiple locations, so in this environment, for instance, we're working with a main, we're working with a prod environment, and we're working with a west, let's say west warehouse. We want to leverage the stock keeping unit because we want to define where our inventory is by location. So since we're dealing with multiple locations, that physical inventory count will actually be taking place by location as opposed to generically from the item card level. All right, so now going down to the warehouse section, you can see here that we have our physical inventory counting period code. So it's the same on both the item card and the stock keeping unit. These are present in this warehouse section. So you can see that we have quarterly selected here. If I click this drop down, it's going to show all of the options that I had shown in my slide and also kind of highlight, the count frequency here. Once this is selected on our item card, on our stock keeping unit, we're going to see that our next counting start date and next counting end date will be updated. We're going to get some values here. So because of my current work date is that I'm signed in as, this next counting start date was calculated for me and then insert into the item card for this item. That same process would take place on the SKU card as well once it is assigned. And then you can see here that, based on quarterly, we need to count this item 4 times a year, saying, all right, so between January 1st and March 31st, you want to do a physical inventory count for this item. Once I perform that physical inventory count, it's going to update this last physical inventory date. So as soon as we go ahead and post that, perform the post action on the physical inventory journal, it's going to come back to this card and insert this date and say, hey, this is when we did our physical inventory count. And then it's going to use that data to update our next counting start date and end date. So it's going to flip to April 1st all the way to the end of June. So our dates will be updated, in which case when we're working from our physical inventory journal, when we do that calculate by counting period prompt, we're going to see it will only fall into our suggestions if we are within this time frame. Well, there is one exception to that, and I will cover that when we go to the physical inventory journal. In addition, there's another field here, which is last counting period date. So this is a little separate from the last physical inventory date. So the physical inventory date, this is when we post from the journal. You can see here on my stock keeping unit, under my home action, I have this calculate counting period. So what you can also do here is if for instance, you don't want it to be considered within this particular counting period, you can click this calculate counting period action, and it's going to update to the time frame that I am today. So I'm going to go up here to my settings quickly. And right now, my work date is scheduled for 3/20. I'm going to modify this. I want to modify this so that way it is actually, let's go to the 12th. So I'm going to the 12th. My work date is now the 12th. That is within this time frame. I wouldn't necessarily need to go to the time frame that matches this. I could just run it from the 20th, but for the purposes of how I want to run the physical inventory journal, I wanted to bump it back to this time period. So now I'm going to go ahead and click the calculate counting period action. And it will just do a little thinking here. It says, do you want to update to the next counting period? I'm going to say yes. And then boom, we can see last counting period is now 3/12. So clicking this action, it's going to automatically apply this. And then it's going to update, the 15th to the 28th. So maybe I actually did this action and I didn't go through the physical inventory journal. This is actually, I sent someone out to the warehouse and they came and told me that, basically it matched the numbers I had in the system. I don't want to go through the mess of actually pulling everything into my physical inventory journal. I just want to say, hey, yep, we did the count. All the numbers were good. We want to push it to the next counting period. So we click that calculate counting period action, and it performs that update here. So that's the primary difference between these two fields, this last counting period update and then this one. So this one is driven by the physical inventory journal, and this one is just driven by performing this calculate action on the stock keeping unit card. All right, so that's not what I want. I wanted to go to my settings, and I'm going to switch my work date back to today. So now I'm back at 3/20, and we can see that, based on 3/20, I'm now back into the counting period for this item. All right, so next is to navigate to our physical inventory journal. All right, so now on the physical inventory journal, we've got two options here again. So one is calculate by counting period, and then the other is calculate period. So we're going over our we just covered our counting periods itself and setting them up on both the item card and the stock keeping unit. So when I click on this, I'm going to see all of the actions. So all of the stock keeping units or item cards that are set between this counting start date and this counting end date. What you'll also notice with these two lines in particular is that, since my work date is the 20th, I'm actually past the end date for these two stock keeping units. What that means is that these are overdue for to be counted, so the system is still going to recommend it. So if we end up past that end date, the system will display those as being required to be counted. If our work date was prior to the start date, these options would not show up. So actually, let's go ahead and display that quick. So I'm going to modify my work date once again, and we're going to pretend it's actually the 28th. So it's the 28th instead of the 30th. Instead of March. So when I open up this, you can see that all of those options from the March period are no longer available because I'm no longer within that counting period that the system will prompt me to perform a count for those items. So it's only going to display and list the suggestions that fall between our start and end date for recommended physical inventory counting. Switch this back once again here. So let's go to the 20th once again. All right, so also on this list, you'll see that we have this item populates 4 times. And one of the reasons for that is that this has been set up on the SKU card. And you can see that we have this item at 4 separate locations. So we're counting this item at 4 separate locations. And so we'll need to perform that count at each location. Now, one of the other things to keep in mind when running this list is, potentially you likely won't want to do your physical inventory journal for everything in this list, or you probably are going to want to do it more than one at a time. So you can click on this, I can click OK. It's going to calculate and pull it into my physical inventory journal. However, I might want to be a little more dynamic with how I run this. So let's say I want to filter by the item number. Typically you'll probably filter by locations if you have locations, but for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to filter by the item number. So I'm going to go ahead and do that filter. I'm getting rid of all of my extra items, and I'm only counting this item. This is my sole focus right now. So now I can go ahead and do select more, and I'm going to do this. And when I click OK now, I'm only going to calculate inventory for what I filtered to and then selected to run. So that's a way to trim down and modify what is getting pulled into your physical inventory journal when you are doing your count. When we cover the other option, it's all you're going to be providing filters in that instance as well. And so it's all about pulling into the items that match what you want to be counting currently. One last note here is you can also see the counting period. Some users like to filter by the counting period, and then we can also see the last time a count was performed. And keep in mind that this was the value that we manually clicked on that stock keeping unit card in order to perform that calculation. All right, on the next screen. So one of the things that's always required when you're performing a physical inventory count is you want to define your posting date. Typically that might be today, whatever day you're performing the journal. But if you had done it in the past, you might want to update it. If you did it yesterday, you might want to double check your numbers there. For the most part, I would really strongly recommend running it with today's date and then performing your physical inventory count the day that you run your calculation. After that, you'll need to enter in your document number. So I'm just going to plug in a value here. So if you try to run this without entering a document number, you're going to basically get nothing into your list. It won't perform a calculation unless you provide a document number. So this is required to run the calculation. Next up is items not on inventory. So I'm going to enable this. What this selection means is this is going to include items that have 0 on-hand inventory. So if I've got 3 at a location and I click, I have this disabled, it's going to go ahead and say, yes, I have 3 at that location, so let's go ahead and pull it in. But if I have 0, it's not going to pull anything in unless I enable this. So this might be just to say, hey, I know that the system doesn't say I have any inventory on hand, but I want to confirm it as part of the physical inventory count. So I'm going to enable this because I want to double check that I do. I want to reconfirm that I have 0 on hand for that item. This is if we want to do printing. I'll cover printing in that print report in a little bit here. All right, so we went ahead and ran that. I'm going to go ahead and remove this junk line at the beginning. That was just from opening and having a blank physical inventory before I ran it. But now these are all the options that came in from the calculate counting period selections that I had performed. What we can see here is that we have 4 different locations, and then actually at the top here we have 2 different bins. So this is bringing in another variable that I haven't discussed yet, which is if you do have bins at a location. So the these counting calculations will also consider the bins that you have inventory for. So in these instances, we have, for these 3 warehouses, we've set it up so that way, we just have generic, it's a simple warehouse. So we just have inventory there. We can transfer from one warehouse to another, but it is a simple warehouse. Now this location, it's an advanced warehouse, meaning that we have bins and we're dealing with multiple bins. And since we're dealing with multiple bins, we need to count inventory not only by location, but we also need to count inventory by bin. The system has indicated that we have 5 in this bin and 2 in this bin, and so we'll need to go to each of these bins and count that item in order to complete our physical inventory count. Now, the big difference, and I'll get to that here, between the calculate by counting period and the calculate inventory action is essentially that the calculate inventory is a lot more, user powered. So it requires, kind of the user to make the decision point for themselves. Again, we're going to want to confirm that our posting date that we confirm our posting date that we're pulling in. We're going to want to enter in our document number, so that's still the same as in the previous instance. The items, double check, do we want to pull in items with zero value, zero on-hand inventory value? We can enable that if we would like. And then there's an additional option here, which is include items without transactions. This include items without transactions. This is for a lot of times you consider a new item. So any item that has no ledger history, that's what that would refer to. Then we scroll down and we have our filters. So when we're running this option, we're going to want to apply our own filters for which items we want to consider within the calculation. So I can enter that item number, but potentially a better option for my calculation is I actually want to calculate by location, or I want to calculate by bin. So maybe I just want to focus on, hey, what's in my bin, what's in this bin, or what's at this location. A lot of times that means that what you're calculating and pulling in might be a little more broad, or even potentially like an item number range. That's also an option. You can do a range for your filter as well, but it allows you to use this option, and then hone in on the category of items that you're focused on. So I do recommend applying some sort of filter just to make sure that you're not pulling everything into this journal, because realistically, you only want to pull in the inventory that you can count to that day. You won't want your values to be lingering here. And I'll get into that in greater detail in a bit here. So I just went ahead and did my filter by location and by bin, and I went ahead and clicked OK. And you can see here the results are a little different. So between my count 1 and count 2, I've got 2 different items now. Now you can see that this bin 1 is duplicated here. Typically you never want to have a duplicated line in your physical inventory journal, but for the purpose of this rundown, I have that here. So you can see that we pulled in 2 items, and we pulled in all inventory for bin 1. And so we went ahead and we filtered to these values. Now, next step, so this is the same no matter which method you choose, is to run your report. So you're going to go up here and you're going to click print, and you're going to generate this option, and you have this here, which is show quantity calculated. If you enable this, this is kind of the main one that you want to keep in mind here. You can print off your physical inventory count report. I've already got these represented here, and the main difference between enabling this is this column right here. And the primary purpose is if you want to include that quantity calculated. That quantity calculated, which actually stems from the physical inventory journal itself. It's what's immediately calculated when you run your lines. It's this quantity calculated column. This is what the system has calculated is representing on hand for your inventory. So this is what you have actively in your location. And so that's what's populating here. It's all dependent on whether or not you want your warehouse user to be privy to what the system calculated for on-hand inventory. So then they take that and they go ahead and they plug in their numbers, and then they would enter their numbers into this physical inventory box. So let's go ahead. I'm going to remove this line quickly. So let's say that I counted 3 in this location, and I actually counted 5. I counted 5 in this bin. So I went ahead and made a 3, entered 3 here and entered 5. So this is what I counted. And you can see that my quantity populated here. So for this quantity, we go over to the left and we take a look at our entry type. So we can see that actually this is switched to a negative entry, which means that we're going to have, when we post, we're going to deduct 2 from our inventory. And for the other one, we're going to actually make a positive adjustment of 3 to our inventory. So we're going to have that impact. Keep in mind here when we perform these adjustments, it is going to be impacting our inventory valuation, and that will be impacted by this unit amount, which is pulling from either your item card or your stock keeping unit. Now, when we post this, we can actually post it when we have matching numbers, and it's still going to register that you did physical inventory count. So let's go ahead and run this quickly. And then when we refresh our stock keeping unit, we should see that our item card has updated. Let's jump to this here. We can see that this last physical inventory date has been applied. All right, so back to our slideshow here. Just a quick overcap. Between the two counting periods, ultimately in the end, they function very similarly. However, one is requires some setup and is working off prompts to prompt the user to perform a count, and one is more just doing a generic filter that you have in mind. Now, before I move on to questions here, I do want to call out one additional option that is required. So there is also a warehouse physical inventory journal. This is required if your warehouse is set up as a direct pick and put away location. If you're set up as a direct pick and put away location, you must use the warehouse physical inventory journal. And then these journals are actually filtered and restricted to specific location. So you'll need a batch for each location that you need to run that journal for. And then ultimately your calculation and register and posting is very similar. The one exception to that is after you register your counts on the warehouse physical inventory journal, if you do have an adjustment, you must also navigate to your item journal and perform the calculate warehouse adjustment action. Since direct pick and put away is an advanced warehouse process, and it's very restrictive in terms of what it will allow you to do without performing additional steps. You must run to this table and then also calculate this to make sure that you have accurate inventory ledger entries. If you don't perform this action, you won't have accurate inventory, on-hand inventory with direct pick and put away. Again, that warehouse physical inventory journal is required if you're a direct pick and put away location. One last thing before we move on to questions is that one risk that I want to call out is you will want, when you perform your calculate action, you're going to want to do your physical inventory calculation same day. You do not want to leave your entries lingering in this spreadsheet because if you've updated your on-hand inventory after you've performed this calculation, you can be working with false numbers. So you don't want to double count an item. So if you do calculate, I recommend going and performing that action rather than leave it lingering here, just to prevent any sort of double counting. All right, with that, are there any questions?
Great, thank you, Jesse, for the presentation today. Again, if anybody does have any questions, please enter them into the question area in the control panel. We are getting at time though, so I'm going to go ahead and add a link to our events page in the chat here. We have lots of exciting events happening this spring session, so you can check out that link for upcoming webinars as well as previous sessions. I'm also going to add a link where you can set your email preferences and opt in to our emails so that you can stay in the know about all upcoming events, as well as see our latest blog articles. All right, I don't see any questions that have come through quite yet, but if you do have a question, you can leave it in the question box or in the post-webinar survey, and we will be sure to get back to you by email later today. All right, so thank you, Jesse, for the information.
Yes,
and
thank you, everyone.
For joining us. Right. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.